Okay. Namaskar and good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all for today's webinar, Winning with Cross-Culture Collaboration. Difference in communication, decision-making, and workplace expectation can either create friction or fuel innovation. Today's session will share a practical insights to help us turn cultural diversity into competitive advantage. With that, I encourage you to share your questions in the Q&A chat box. We will address as many as possible within the time. With that, it's my privilege to introduce you to Mr. Raghavendra Pongshe, Regional President of IACC West India Council, to deliver the formal welcome remark. Mr. Pongshe is the second generation entrepreneur and the managing partner at Bhati and Pongshe, an IP law consulting firm established in 1965. He manages over 15,000 IP assets across 150 countries. He is an intellectual property advisor, a mentor to family businesses on succession planning, and an active contributor to Startup India ecosystem through various advisory roles within Innovation Council and government-backed programs. We are truly delighted to have him with us. Over to you, Mr. Pongshe.
Thank you, Vishnu. Namaskar and good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, I warmly welcome you to today's webinar, Winning with Cross-Cultural Collaboration. It is encouraging to see such a distinguished gathering of professionals who recognize that global success depends not only on strategy, but on the ability to work effectively across cultures, particularly between India and the United States. As many of you know, the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce has for over 5 decades served as a premier bilateral institution dedicated to strengthening trade, investment, and strategic partnerships between our two nations. Platforms such as today's webinar reflect our continued commitment to equipping businesses and leaders with insights that enhance global competitiveness. In today's interconnected business landscape, cross-cultural collaboration is no longer a soft skill. It is a strategic imperative. The ability to understand diverse perspectives, navigate communication nuances, and build trust across geographies directly drives innovation, stronger partnerships, and sustainable growth. We are privileged to have with us accomplished global practitioners who bring deep, real-world experience in cross-border engagement. I am confident their insights will provide practical frameworks to strengthen your international business relationships. I would also like to extend our sincere appreciation to our valued partners, MINDDOTS and the Culture Locus, for their collaboration in bringing this session to life. Their commitment to fostering meaningful cultural understanding aligns seamlessly with the Chamber's mission. For those joining us today who are not yet members, I warmly invite you to explore membership with the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and become a part of a dynamic network that connects businesses, policymakers, and thought leaders across India and the United States. I encourage all participants to actively engage and share your questions in the Q&A chat for our moderator, Dr. Pearl John. Thank you once again for joining us. I wish you a highly insightful and productive session. Over to you, Dr. John. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pongshe. That truly set the tone for today's webinar, and I really appreciate your leadership and the way you presented this out for us. So good evening, all distinguished leaders who are joining from across India and the United States. Perhaps I should begin with a simple observation. Never before in history have India and the United States been so deeply intertwined through capital, technology, talent, and leadership itself. India today hosts over 1,700 global capability centers. American corporations increasingly depend on Indian leadership to drive global strategy, not just delivery. And for the first time, major strategic decisions affecting global markets are being co-created across these two democracies. And yet, despite this unprecedented integration, one invisible force continues to quietly shape whether collaboration accelerates or stalls. And that force, ladies and gentlemen, is culture. Because when collaboration works, organizations compound value at extraordinary speed. And when it falters, value erosion begins quietly long before anyone even recognizes it. That is why this conversation matters. And that is why we have assembled a panel that has just not studied this phenomenon, but has lived it, has shaped it, and navigated it at scale. So this evening, this is not a lecture, this is a leadership conversation. But let me place this with an important disclaimer. The cultural patterns that we discuss are based on research for persons living in a particular culture, not based on race. So an Indian who is a long-time citizen of the US may very well display behaviors that reflect the culture or vice versa. So let us put this in context. What is it that we are trying to achieve? Let's move on to the next slide, which has the learning objectives. First, we want to build a sharper understanding of some of the common cultural differences between India and the United States, which may influence how collaboration unfolds in the work. Second, we will focus on practical techniques leaders can apply immediately to navigate these differences and strengthen collaboration. And finally, we will explore how leaders can more deliberately analyze and shape organizational culture itself. Because culture is not accidental. It is continuously shaped by what leaders reward, what they tolerate, and what they clarify. So when leaders understand how cultures operate, they gain the ability to strengthen alignment, accelerate execution, and build organizations that perform consistently across geographies. And taken together, these three objectives address something fundamental. But before we enter frameworks and models, I want to begin somewhere far more human. I want each of our panelists to answer one simple question. What is it about this topic, the Indo-US collaboration and culture, that genuinely excites you personally and professionally? Mind you, it's not as experts, but as leaders who have lived this reality. Let me begin with you, Michael. You've spent years diagnosing collaboration challenges across organizations. What excites you about this moment in the Indo-US collaboration?
Well, thank you, Pearl, and good evening, everyone. What really excites me is the fact that each of these two topics, cross-cultural management as well as collaboration, are special and important in themselves. But when we combine the two, when we look at collaboration through a cross-cultural lens, this is super important. I've never been part of a webinar nor seen this addressed. And I think this is a great opportunity today to dwell into something that's really relevant in the Indo-US context. Secondly, Pearl, the management and business connection between India and the US goes back a long way. If we recall, American faculty helped set up India's first B school, which was XLRI Jamshedpur in 49, and IIM Ahmedabad in 1961. American expertise helped strengthen IIT Kanpur, and it's been a symbiotic relationship that's exciting. India has contributed about 3.5 million exceptionally talented people to the US and we see engineers, we see business leaders, we see CEOs. So it's truly exciting. I think we're poised in our relationship in business and management, India and the US, to really go from good to great.
Beautifully said, Michael. Indeed, aligning human systems without losing speed, and in the context of so much that has gone to our advantage, both from the US and India, in the entire education, the institutional setting up phase is remarkable. Priska, your work focuses deeply on the science of human behavior and culture. What excites you about this moment?
Thanks, Pearl, for that question. I'd say what excites me most is that leaders today are beginning to talk about culture in very different lens. They start to recognize that culture is not something in a clouds. It is actually one of the most powerful levers for execution and performance. And now that we really have the ability to measure it, diagnose it for many different organizations.
Indeed, Priska, culture is not merely an abstraction, but thank you for pointing us that it is measurable, it is diagnosable. Now, we will talk about this later, but let me move on to you, Randall. What is it about today excites you?
Thank you, Pearl. For me, this topic is deeply personal. I arrived in India over 3 decades ago on a fellowship with the American Institute of Indian Studies. I was curious to discover India. I fell in love with this country. I fell in love with this woman in Delhi, and we became a married couple. She's beautiful, and we have started our family here. So India is now my home. We have more in common than we realized. That these two great countries, we're both democracies. We both love the English language, among many other languages. But I've seen that when we are willing to adjust, our cultural differences complement and energize us. That excites me.
That's powerful, Randall. What you've just said points to something fundamental. Collaboration across cultures is not just about adjustment, it's about expansion. And what strikes me listening to each of you is this. This is not a theoretical conversation. This is about how trust forms, how decisions get made, how ownership is assumed or avoided, and ultimately how value is created across borders. Which brings us to the most fundamental question. Before we can improve cross-cultural collaboration, we must first understand what culture actually is. Priska, let me begin with you there. So, what is culture? Could you demystify that for us?
Of course, Pearl. That's actually a very foundational question because culture is often misunderstood by many of us. Most people think of culture as the statements on the wall, the language people use every day, but those are really just the surface. So let us jump into the next slide, please, as I introduce to you what culture is. So on the next slide, you will see a gist of how we define culture. You know, according to a lot of cultural and psychological researchers, culture is the traditions, standards of behavior, and the other unwritten rules which govern how people function in groups. So it tells us what is good, effective, safe, and moral. It shapes how decisions are made and whether people speak up or hold back. Now, let me share with you a project that Google ran, about 10 years ago. It was a research program called Project Aristotle. They studied almost 200 teams in Google to determine why some teams succeeded while the others failed. The researchers found that cultural norms of the team was key. They said, team effectiveness depends more on how members interact than who is on the team. For example, among the most effective teams they found, all members have similar airtime in meetings. So this equal turn taking is visible behavior, but it signals some foundational cultural values that people have internalized, including the dependence on collective intelligence and the psychological safety that people feel when they take risks, when they voice opinions, and also when they admit mistakes without the fear of punishment. So, in short, culture is something that you don't see directly, but it determines how people behave, how trust forms, and how collaboration unfolds.
Then, where do cross-cultural differences arise, and how they will affect workplace behavior when teams span different continents, like India
Right.
and the US?
Right. Just now we have discussed that culture is the invisible rules, right? And these rules, they can differ significantly from one group to another and from one culture to another. For example, in one culture, openly challenging a senior leader is seen as initiative. In others, it may be seen as overstepping. So the behavior is the same, but culture determines how it is interpreted. These cross-cultural differences in interpreting behaviors influences how people act and react, like how quickly people move to decisions, how comfortable they are expressing thoughts, and how much context they believe is necessary before acting. This is why understanding culture becomes essential for effective leadership, especially in cross-cultural environments like Indo-US collaboration. So, as we know, for example, in the US, the cultural environment has historically emphasized individuals as agent to shape the environment. So, in the meetings, people tend to state their views clearly, early, to move the conversation forward and to refine them just through the discussion. However, in India, there is often a stronger emphasis on understanding environment before you act. So in conversations, that means understanding the stakeholders involved and the broader context before taking a really visible position. People may tend to observe, absorb, and enter the conversation when they have a more complete picture. Right. You can see both approaches are thoughtful. And the differences you see here, they're not about their capability or intent, but just different cultural rhythms. Well, by now, I hope it has become quite clear to everyone that we need to go beyond the visible behaviors when we lead a team, especially cross-cultural one. It is very important for leaders to observe and understand their people. Look at the subtle but deeply learned patterns in how they engage with others. This is where leaders start to build up their cultural awareness.
Priska, that's a very powerful insight, because what you've highlighted is that cultural differences often shape how leadership shows up, not whether it exists. And when these differences are not consciously understood, leaders can easily misread intent, interpreting behavior through their own cultural lens rather than the other person's reality. And this is where cross cultural collaboration moves from theory into lived leadership experience. Wonderful. Randall, you've spent over 3 decades working at this intersection as an American leader deeply embedded in the Indian organizational context. What has been your secret sauce in adjusting to cultural differences over the years? Randall?
Just a
Audie,
long
let me get
reminder to
to, yeah.
Randall.
Oh, thank you. Pearl, it's good to be online here. My mistake on the audio. First, with the secret sauce, there's 3 things I've learned here in India, living, working. I've learned to listen more and speak less when in a different culture. This allows me to understand where they're coming from and how they perceive the situation. I can then adjust my response to what I believe is the most effective way to communicate with them, telling them what they need to know. The second thing is that, which is very important, is not to judge other cultures, especially those that I may not and you may not understand, and empathize why they do what they do. Figure that out. The third is I expect the unexpected. Life has many surprises. I've learned to smile and adjust accordingly. For example, there was a time when I was called into what I thought was a very strategic private one-on-one meeting with one institution. And lo and behold, when I showed up, 5 people were sitting in there, listening in on our private conversation. I learned that in this particular institution, that's how they do it. This is the way they operate. And it was with respect. And actually, the outcome was very good in that meeting. So I celebrate.
Randall, that sounds great. You're truly a success story for us on how to collaborate across American and Indian cultures. Now, friends, we've heard Priska and Randall on the theme of culture and cross-culture. Perhaps it's time to shift gears and move to collaboration. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Pearl. I think collaboration is so special and so important for a few reasons. First of all, it is far more complex and complicated as compared to teamwork, which itself is challenging. In teamwork, you have one manager and you have an intact team. So there is a centrality in terms of accountability and a familiarity in terms of the team members. Whereas in collaboration, we're talking about working or teaming across teams. There are different leaders, different accountabilities, different budgets, P&Ls, different business units. And how do we pull together in this context? That is the challenge of collaboration. It's not a secret, Pearl, that collaboration in itself is extremely tough. In fact, I have a business consultant friend who told me off the record that in his estimation, the number one challenge in corporations in India, pretty sweeping statement, is leadership collaboration. How do you get the executive team to pull together when they have competing priorities, budgets, etc.? But obviously, it's sensitive. Nobody talks about it. Now, on top of that, when we introduce cross-cultural lens, the complexity magnifies immediately.
Right. Thanks, Mike. I can completely resonate with what your corporate friend informed you. And perhaps it's important for us to understand this from an inside-out perspective. So what, in your experience, is a leading practice to enhance collaboration in complex environments?
Thank you, Pearl. There are many different approaches, excellent in different contexts. But in my experience, an approach that is simple yet profound and is arguably the most widely prevalent framework is the 5 dysfunctions of a team approach by Patrick Lencioni, who's based in the US. Maybe have the next slide, please. So the 5 dysfunctions of a team is a warning. It's the negative aspect of, us needing to understand certain things happen. There are certain pulls and pressures and fears or dysfunctions. And if we understand them and if we address them, they can challenge us in terms of being 5 behaviors of high-performing teams. So let's go across the 5 levels. The first is obviously trust. Nothing good can happen without trust. So enlightened leaders will move their team from a fear of vulnerability to a place where they relax, they realize that there is safety. They can be themselves, they can speak their minds, they can be accepted. There is an inclusion of people who are diverse, and they can contribute. Once there is trust in the team, we can move to the second level of collaboration. And please note, this is sequential. One builds on the other. These are not 5 random ideas. This is a sequential layering process, and therefore it is indeed a framework. So the second level is positive conflict. Once there is trust and we feel safe, and we are encouraged by leadership to healthy debate, then there is the debating. There is we debate ideas, solutions, avenues. We're not debating people, right? And everyone is heard, and the best idea wins. This is itself powerful. But imagine this happening across teams, across businesses, across P&Ls, across geos. This is special. When we have healthy conflict, we can move to the next level, which is genuine commitment. So the team leadership will help us understand that we don't have to lurk within the realms of ambiguity. We can be clear and specific about what we agree with, what we disagree with, because everyone has spoken, all views have been heard. We can then converge on a decision which we may not all agree with, but at least we will understand how we've arrived at the decision, and there's buy-in, which can then take us to the fourth level, which is accountability. And this is not blame, but ownership and a shared accountability where every leader feels empowered to ask questions of a peer without kicking up a fuss, kicking up dust, or getting into a fight. It's a matter of we are mutually accountable for the goals that we have committed to, which then enables us to move to the fifth level, which is a focus on collective results. It's not individual egos, it's not our individual incentives, but we are defining success as the organizational mission being achieved. And that's really powerful.
Right. As I can see, bringing in collaboration within a culture could itself be a daunting task, right? So how do you ensure the cross-cultural differences can be effectively managed? I can see them to be extremely challenging.
Sure. And Pearl, a couple of decades back, it was a huge challenge for, let's say, the IT companies in India, which were really expanding. Since then, there's been a lot of water that's flown under the varied bridges, and we now have a handle on it. We understand cross-cultural challenges, but we still perhaps have to build the skill. So let's take the first level of trust. We are different in varied ways. Vishnu, we'll stay on the first slide, please. So can we go back, Vishnu? Yeah. So in the US culture, trust is largely task-based. It's an outcome of reliable delivery. In the India context, there's a lot of relationship or feeling comfortable because you have a personal connect with the person. So let's visualize a typical Indo-US multicultural team. And let's say a US project leader who comes in, there's a brief meet and greet, and boom, 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 we get down to work. But there is a kind of a slowdown and a reluctance from the India side. Why? Because they're not comfortable. They don't know this leader. So it's difficult for them to trust. Whereas from the US perspective, hey, what's the problem? Why are we slowing down? Why is execution slowing down? So the understanding of how we build trust differently enables us to converge and meet at a midpoint. So there is a little bit of personal connection, as well as being very clear, what are the project objectives, the methodology, timelines, and let's go.
Right. Yeah, it could potentially erode to being tragic because of the different ways different cultures work. Perhaps it's useful to bring this alive with a real-life example on how these cross-cultural differences play out in the workplace.
Sure. I think a practical example really helps. So a few days back, because of this program, I spoke to a client of mine in the US. He's an NRI who's been in the US for most of his life, working with several corporations. So he explained it as follows. He says, the communication style in India tends to be, again, we can't generalize, right? But tends to be more indirect and non-specific. It's nuanced. You need to read between the lines. The US side is very direct, very specific. So he says, let's say a planning meeting. So where there are India-based colleagues and American-based, US-based colleagues. So the proposition is put forward, the plan is put forward, but the India side is kind of hesitant. They couch their response with qualifiers, and the American side is baffled. It's like, do you agree? Do you not agree? And okay, no, that won't work. So the US side goes back, they regroup, they come back with a second version of the plan. But that too does not find approval. And it's like, would you please be specific? And maybe Randall here can tell us. Randall, as an American, have you encountered this kind of non-specific feedback, and how does it, how does it sit with you?
Yes, I have. It depends on the timeline, Michael. If the matter is urgent and important, it's very annoying to not receive clear and unambiguous feedback. But if there's a longer timeline, I'd shrug and take it in stride. This interaction may become somewhat frustrating, though. A typical American may not call it out at this early point. That's my take.
Randall, are you claiming that Americans are more patient than Indians?
No, that's very funny. No, we are not not such. Dream on, really. No, not at all. Actually, I'm referring to the fact that in the US culture that I'm aware of, negative feedback or evaluation is shared quite indirectly with softeners. However, our Indian friends, our Indian colleagues are more used to sharing direct feedback and evaluation. Quite shocking for me sometimes. So that is another difference that we need to be mindful of.
Michael, you have anything to add?
I think we can take it ahead and look at the next level of collaboration in the framework, which is a positive conflict. So on the India side, leadership tends to be very cognizant of seniority hierarchy, and on the US side, not at all. So the same client was telling me in a typical meeting, the American colleagues couldn't care less what is the seniority of people in the room, they will share their mind. Whereas on the India side, if there is a senior person, the juniors tend to clam up and will definitely not offer a contrary opinion, mostly. So this therefore stymies positive conflict. It inhibits, ideation, brainstorming, right? So that's an area where the US-based leader or an India-based leader who has a different style has to go on the front foot and really encourage dissent, different opinions, create that safety to say, hey, I want you to speak up. And it's perfectly fine if you have a different point of view, as long as you have a rationale, right? So that's where the work of leadership comes in, understanding the differences and encouraging healthy debate.
That is truly pivotal for creating a climate that encourages contrarian views, right? To raise the quality of thought to solve complex business problems. In my experience, I find this to be one of those clear hallmarks that differentiate the significantly impactful leaders from the also-rans. The focus is not on the senior most point of view, but the best thinking to solve a problem. And I think when you get that balance right, truly magic happens. So the question is, how does a healthy dose of disagreement equip us to enhance engagement, Michael?
Sure. So when there's such a vigorous ideation and with freedom, it's really an opportunity for the best idea to win. And all in the room have spoken. And there's been an inclusive kind of nature to bring in people who are, not so vocal, etc. Not making it so obvious as saying, Mr. So-and-so, would you speak up? But we could have a poll, we could rotate leadership. There are many different ways leaders can get everybody to speak. Then we're able to go to the third level, which is genuine commitment. How? Because everyone has spoken, different views have been taken up, we can do away with the ambiguity of what is your position on this issue or that issue, scenarios, policies, strategic options. We can take away the ambiguity, and then there is clarity and an alignment with the big picture, and we are ready to come to a decision because it's open. And that's where buy-in happens. In fact, Pearl, I'd like to us to skip a couple of points that I wanted to share. And can we go across to what our colleague Ernie Goyette has for us? So,
sure, go for it.
Yeah, great. Just in the interest of time. So Ernie has an excellent case to share of a US healthcare client who has an interesting experience of their tech and their back office support being in India. And the main parent corporation is in the US. So let's hear what Ernie has to say. Vishnu, could you play the clip for us? Ernie is in San Diego. It's 4 a.m. in the morning. One of the challenges of collaborating across cultures, right? So he has prepared his message for us in a video clip. And let's just hear. All right.
Having him. I'm just loading it. Yes.
No problem. So Ernie has a fascinating background. He's been a professional speaker. He's an improvised comedy coach. He's a communications coach. So he's a man with who wears various hats, and he has an interesting personal background. His mother is Indian from Mumbai, and his dad is American. So he's grown up, in a multicultural family environment. So his observations are quite interesting.
There you go.
Good evening, everyone. I grew up seeing negotiations between New York and Mumbai at the dinner table. My mother is from Mumbai. My dad is from New York. And even in family decisions like planning Thanksgiving, you notice that one side wants clarity fast, while the other side is more comfortable with.
Vishnu, we can't hear the audio.
It looks like it's frozen.
Yes. Also, Vishnu, you might want to increase the volume of your laptop to maximum so that we get the maximum volume as well. Thanks.
Is the audio good?
Between New York and Mumbai.
Can you
at
hear the
the
audio?
dinner
Soft.
table.
Rather
My
soft.
mother is from Mumbai. My dad is from New York. And even in Good evening, everyone. You know, I grew up seeing negotiations between New York and Mumbai at the dinner table. My mother is from Mumbai. My dad is from New York. And even in family decisions like planning Thanksgiving, you notice that one side wants clarity fast, while the other side is more comfortable with flexibility. So I spent most of my life watching two cultures operate from very different instincts, and both of them feel completely logical from the inside. And that's the key. When we talk about Indo-US collaboration, we're not talking about competence gaps. We're talking about different defaults. Let me give you a real example. We worked with a large US healthcare organization, highly regulated, highly matrixed, hospitals, insurers, pharmacies, government stakeholders, really complex ecosystem. Their tech and back office teams were in India, strong talent on both sides, yet friction kept showing up. Not because people weren't capable, but because assumptions weren't aligned. Let's start with leadership. In many US organizations, leadership is horizontal. Junior colleagues challenge ideas, debate is expected. Leaders facilitate airtime. In India, leadership often has a more clear hierarchy. Direction flows downward. Respect for structure is visible. Both models work, but in a matrix environment, if people are waiting for authority instead of engaging across levels, momentum slows. Now let's talk about communication. US teams tend to be direct, specific. Questions are normal, even blunt ones, but in India, communication can be more nuanced. A junior colleague may hesitate to ask a clarifying question in a big meeting, especially with senior leaders present. So the meeting ends, everybody appears aligned, but if something wasn't fully understood, execution slows later, not because of resistance, because clarification never happened. Then there's executive messaging. US executives often want the big picture kind of zoomed out, what's the recommendation? What decision do you need from me? Then details come next. India-based managers often begin with comprehensive context. It's rigorous, it's thorough, it's thoughtful. But if the zoom level doesn't match the audience, the message loses impact before it even lands. Finally, there's trust. US leaders in this organization lean toward autonomy. Deliver outcomes, and you have space, you have freedom. India-based leaders, especially in virtual settings, lean more toward visibility. Tracking activity builds assurance. Neither approach is wrong. They reflect different assumptions about how trust is built. Small intentional adjustments. India-based leaders lowering hierarchy just enough to invite dissent across levels. US leaders pausing before ending meetings to ask, is anything unclear, or does anyone see this differently? India-based managers adjusting message zoom levels for executive timeframes. US leaders investing in personal connection, so autonomy feels supported, not distant. When those micro adjustments happen, something shifts. The friction doesn't disappear. It becomes productive. Because collaboration isn't about eliminating differences. It's about understanding them well enough to adapt. And in complex systems like healthcare, that adaptability is the difference between coordination and performance. If we can align our defaults, not erase them, Indo-US collaboration doesn't just work. Outcomes move from good to great. Thank you for having me. Back over to you, Michael.
Well, thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Vishnu, for that. Vishnu, can we have the next slide, please?
Yes.
So just to link what Ernie has been sharing from, ground zero, which is an actual experience of a healthcare client in the US, let's relate that and take it back to the 5 behaviors of a team framework. So we just quickly look at what was experienced and how does it impact collaboration. The leadership style top-down obviously inhibits trust. Also, the very way in which trust is built in a US culture and an Indian culture is different, right? So straight away, we have two cultural factors diminishing trust of the team. Then talking about communication, it's more indirect, right? So there is a sense of, really what is your stand? Not realizing that it's a more technical, it's a more nuanced contextual approach. Uh, Coming to executive messaging, uh, communication in India tends to be richer in context, and the time frame is a little more flexible. So there's such a need to modulate our message to the altitude of the audience. If we are meeting with executives, keep it short and brief, keep it to 5 minutes, talk about the main idea, the rationale, pros and cons, and that's it. The details can be delegated to the next lower level. But if we are not aware of this, we can just lose the game before our message even lands. So Pearl, these are some kind of connections between practical situations and the 5 behaviors of a team approach to collaboration.
Thanks, Mike. I think that linkage that you established with the real life example as to how it plays out within the context of collaboration and the various challenges around it is brilliant. I think that really provides us enough food for thought. Perhaps it's time to sort of shift gears and focus on issues around organizational level rather than sort of looking at the more fundamental issues around trust and conflict and commitment, which largely plays out within the teams and the leadership interactions. But organizations don't necessarily operate through these mechanisms, these isolated teams. They operate through systems. And in a complex Indo-US environment, leaders are often working across geographies, across reporting structures, and deeply embedded institutional norms, which raises a more fundamental leadership question. How do leaders recognize culture not just at the interpersonal level, but at the organizational level? Priska, would you attempt to unravel it for us?
Yeah, let me try. At the organizational level, culture becomes way more consequential and even more difficult to see. An organization's culture operates in a huge system. It no longer only governs what individuals do and how they interact with each other. It creates an organization-wide patterns of behaviors. Specifically, what behaviors are consistently rewarded, what behaviors are tolerated, also what behaviors carry consequences, and what not. It creates a climate, a lived reality that keeps shaping people's behaviors.
A lived reality?
Yeah, a lived reality. So recall that earlier I mentioned Google's Project Aristotle. The psychological safety people feel when expressing opinions was found to be one of the key drivers for their team's success, right? So now imagine if this safety is only being said, but not experienced. How would people think?
Probably to just shut up and not speak up.
Yeah, that's right. So, for example, in an organization, it may formally state that it values diverse perspectives, but if leaders who challenge decisions are quietly being excluded from future opportunities, then people will learn very quickly that in reality, it's safer to follow consensus. So similarly, in organizations, they may state that they value innovation, but if escalation of risk is regarded as failure rather than learning, then leaders will unconsciously avoid experimentation. So this is how culture creates a lived reality where people are shaped they calibrate their behaviors based on what the culture signals as safe, effective, and rewarded.
So in cross-cultural environments like the Indo-US operating model, we see leaders are navigating not only organizational cultural expectations, but also national cultural norms. That's quite a complicated combo, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very spot on, Mike. I would totally agree with it.
Priska, what you've articulated is foundational and fundamental, because many organizations assume culture is what they declare, right? But in reality, culture is what the system reinforces. And that distinction explains why even well-designed strategies often fail at execution. Not because the strategy lacks clarity, but because sometimes the underlying cultural environment quietly resists it. And this is particularly visible during moments of transition, right? In terms of new leadership, digital transformation, global integration. On paper, alignment exists, but behavior tells a completely different story. And I'm just starting to wonder, how can leaders gain actual clarity about culture rather than relying on their intuition, especially, as Mike said, the organizational and national combo of cultural differences, making it hard for leaders to see clearly?
Yeah, you're right, Pearl. And that is precisely where we need structured cultural diagnosis, because culture is inherently experiential. Often, leaders can sense when something is misaligned, but without structured insight, it remains difficult to identify the source. Through our work, across years, studying organizational behaviors for many different leadership teams, we found that culture operates across three interconnected layers. Let's jump into the next slide, please, Vanush, and we can take a look at the three layers of culture. So the first one is the bubble at the bottom right. It's about personal values. As discussed before, they are the invisible foundation of people's behaviors. They determine what people prioritize as individuals, how they interpret things like responsibility, authority, and risk, etc. The second one is the bubble at the bottom left. So it's about workplace behavioral climate, the lived reality that people experience day by day, whether speaking up is being encouraged, if escalation is acknowledged, or if excellence is being praised. And the third one would be the bubble at the top. So it's about organizational strategic intent. This one reflects where the organization is trying to go.
So interesting, Priska. So among the three, which one should we start with? Which one should we focus on?
Good question, Randall. The key is not seeing these three separately, but to identify the alignment and misalignment between them, because it is alignment instead of any of the three alone that drives engagement, motivation, and therefore business growth. So when these three layers align, execution accelerates naturally. All the efforts across the whole organization form a breeze of wind, heading towards the same direction, the direction that the organization aspires to go. But when they diverge, even when the people capability or your strategic intent are strong, development stagnates because everyone is just going in very different directions. What do you think, Pearl? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. So essentially what we are saying is structured cultural diagnostics helps leaders identify the alignment gaps, which were usually hard to tell precisely.
Exactly. And that's what leaders' intuition or simple service cannot reveal at all. And most importantly, they provide an insight-driven roadmap for intentional cultural shifts, whether it is to enhance collaboration, drive innovation, or to adapt to new leadership.
This is a profound shift in how leaders must think about culture, because historically, culture has been treated as something intangible, right? Something leaders sense but cannot systematically understand. What you're describing, Priska, is culture becoming observable, measurable, actionable, which fundamentally changes the leadership equation. It allows culture to move from being a passive inheritance to an actively managed strategic capability. Could you share a real example where cultural alignment, or for that matter, misalignment, directly influenced organizational execution, Priska?
Of course. There was this large multinational organization that we worked with. It was undergoing a very critical leadership transition. A new CEO had came in with a strong mandate to accelerate innovation and cross-border integration. On paper, the leadership team was fine. They were highly capable and aligned. But, in reality, we see that execution remained slow. Decisions were revisited repeatedly, collaboration was simply ineffective. So we conducted a structured cultural analysis for them using a tool called Synapse. We investigated 3 bubbles that you see here. So what became clear through was that the leadership team had inherited the behavioral patterns shaped and accumulated over many years. While some leaders prioritize speed and experimentation, many others prioritize stability and risk minimization. Well, again, neither approach was incorrect, but the absence of shared cultural alignment create execution drag.
So what did you do then to help this transition? It sounds like multiple leaders had been deeply molded by the existing culture, and bringing that change is, in my experience, particularly a challenging task.
Yes, you're right, Pearl. It's difficult. But your question brings me to my next slide. So, Venush, may we please move to the next slide, please? When it comes to culture, right? So I always love reminding people that culture is actually made by and made for people. So as you will see on the next slide, is a very important concept. So, culture is really made by and made for people. So remember, people are culturally shapers. So we can actually reshape the culture too. With that in mind, back in the example that I shared just now, so we have gathered a lot of insights from the structured cultural analysis. So the alignment gaps became visible. We were then able to work with the organization to realign the leadership expectations, the behavioral norms and policies with the strategic direction. So we did a series of facilitated discussions to allow leadership conversations in safe space, to identify execution struggles and actionable changes, and to provide enablement to people to execute those changes. Over time, the organization momentum improved significantly, not because the strategy itself changed, but because culture finally became aligned with the strategy. And this is the power of cultural clarity.
What this makes unmistakably clear is that culture is not simply a leadership philosophy, right? It is an execution infrastructure. It determines whether escalation happens early or too late, if leaders challenge constructively or choose to remain silent, if accountability is mutual or is directional, and ultimately, whether organizations operate at their full potential or below it. For leaders operating across India and the US environments, this becomes even more critical, because now you're not just aligning strategy across organizations, you are aligning deeply learned leadership systems across cultures. And that requires intentionality, not just assumption. And as we come toward the close of the segment, could you leave our IACC audience with 3 practical things that they could do starting tomorrow?
Sure. So let us jump to the next slide, please. I do prepared some of the steps that leaders can take. If I were to suggest 3 steps, I would say number 1, to observe the behavioral patterns, not just the stated values. Reflect on what gets rewarded and repeated. Second, it's about creating a mechanisms to surface cultural reality objectively. Structured cultural diagnostics with established tools like synapse provide clarity that intuition alone cannot. And third, align leadership behavior with strategic intent. Culture shifts when leadership signals change consistently, because ultimately, culture becomes what the organizations enable repeatedly. And when culture aligns with strategy and collaboration, will just, accelerate naturally when the culture is aligned with the strategy.
Right. Thank you, Priska, for that. So, dearly beloved, as we come toward the close of this conversation, let me step back and reflect on what we have collectively uncovered this evening. What began as a discussion on cross-cultural collaboration has revealed something far deeper. We have seen that collaboration does not break because people lack capability, but it breaks when interpretation diverges, when trust is assumed but not established, when alignment appears present but is not fully understood. And we've seen the culture operates quietly, shaping decisions, influencing behaviors, and ultimately determining whether strategy translates into execution. And perhaps most importantly, we have recognized that in today's Indo-US operating environment, collaboration is no longer episodic, it is structural, it is continuous, it is foundational to how organizations create value, which means culture is no longer peripheral to leadership, it is central to leadership. So before we bring this webinar to a close, what I'd like to do is to invite each of our panelists to leave us with one closing thought or one leadership principle that you believe is essential for leaders operating across cultures. And once we do with this, then we have maybe a few minutes for some questions and answers. So Michael, may I begin with you?
Sure. I think, Pearl, apart from looking at our differences as a problem or a headache to be overcome, I think we can also look at differences as an opportunity to leverage the differences and create synergy. For example, in the IT industry, it is extremely well known that Americans as a whole tend to be highly gifted in design, the conceptual and design aspects, UI, UIX, etc. And the Indian colleagues are exceptionally gifted in technical operationalization, execution. And so you have some world-leading products and services that have been designed with this powerful synergy.
Thank you, Michael. That is profound indeed. Randall?
Yes. For the leaders who are crossing cultures, I would say remain curiosity to enjoy your own and other cultures. Also, let us never judge motives, especially when you don't understand another culture. And finally, I would say be willing to adjust, to stretch, leave your comfort zone, and you will be so enriched.
Thank you, Randall. And Priska?
Thanks, Pearl. I'd say culture becomes powerful when it becomes visible. I think everyone should, start to realize this. When leaders understand the behavioral patterns operating within their organizations, they gain the ability to shape and also reshape those patterns in that, in an intentional way. So when culture aligns with strategic intent, the execution and growth will just skyrocket.
Right. Wonderful, Priska. Thank you for that. I have some questions that have come in, and I'm going to just call these out. And I would request you to just put your hand up and respond to these questions. So the first question is, how can leaders adapt their communication style to be effective across cultures without losing authenticity? That's a very good question. So without losing authenticity, how can leaders adapt their communication styles? Who would like to take that?
Okay, I'd like to. I think the important thing is to understand, how people kind of form trust, to invest in some time in building relationships, to understand and talk about our differing communication styles. So without judging or criticizing, we appreciate that we need to work together. And I think to leverage this understanding, to provide context, not just directives, because the US side tends to work more with results and outcome-based approaches. The Indian side is richer in context. So to balance both, and I think importantly, let's avoid judging, as Randall said, an indirect communication style or a non-specific communication style as being a lack of competence. It's not. It's just a different way of looking at things.
Thanks, Mike. That is powerful. I would completely concur with what you said. Interestingly, we have a number of questions, but in the interest of time, we are going to have to stop taking any more questions. Should you be keen on responses to your questions, please do reach out to us and we will share our views with you. As we bring this conversation to a close, let me leave you with one central leadership truth. In today's world, strategy is no longer the ultimate differentiator. Culture is. Because value is no longer created within the safety of one's geography or one team or one worldview. It is co-created across time zones, across institutional histories, and across deeply different assumptions about power, dissent, and ownership. And in that distributed reality, culture quietly determines whether collaboration becomes a force multiplier or a drag coefficient. Let me briefly crystallize 3 enduring insights from our discussion. First, culture operates as an invisible logic. It shapes how trust forms, how disagreement is expressed, how decisions are interpreted, and how commitment is enacted. What appears as hesitation in one system may in fact be deliberation. What appears as urgency in another may be experienced as pressure. The critical leadership capability, therefore, is not judgment, but interpretation. The ability to see behavior in its cultural context. Second, effective cross-cultural collaboration is not accidental, it is engineered. It requires leaders to make the implicit explicit, to clarify intent, confirm alignment, and create environments where people can speak honestly without fear of unintended consequences. The shift is subtle but profound. From assuming agreement to ensuring alignment. From relying on process to building trust. From managing activity to enabling ownership. Third, organizational culture is not defined by statements. It is defined by systems. What gets rewarded, what gets tolerated, what gets escalated, and what gets quietly absorbed. When leadership intent, organizational climate, and strategic direction are aligned, execution accelerates naturally. When they are not, even the best strategies stall. And perhaps the most important realization is this: collaboration rarely fails because people lack capability. It falters when clarity is absent. The opportunity before Indo-US leaders today is extraordinary, not merely to bridge cultural differences, but to harness them. Because when trust is intentional, when dialogue is honest, and when ownership is explicit, organizations do not merely collaborate better, they become capable of executing at a level that would otherwise be impossible. Ultimately, culture is not something leaders inherit, it is something leaders shape through what they model, what they reinforce, and what they refuse to ignore. If there is one thought that I'd like to leave you with, it is this: in today's world, competitive advantage is no longer created by strategy alone. It is created by how fast people across cultures can trust each other, challenge each other, and align with each other. Because when trust is weak, execution slows. When trust is strong, execution compounds. Culture is not what organizations say, it is what people feel safe to do. And the leaders who shape the clarity shape the future of their organizations. On behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce and my fellow panelists, thank you for your presence, your engagement, and your leadership. We hope this conversation not only provided insight, but strengthened your capacity to lead with clarity and confidence across cultures. Thank you, and we wish you continued success in winning through cross-cultural collaboration. Over to you, Vishnu.
Dr. Paul, thank you so much for this. Before we conclude, I would like to bring our Chamber's Regional Vice President, Mr. Manoj Balwani, to deliver the vote of thanks. Mr. Balwani is a certified AI generalist and an independent director, having studied at prestigious IIM Ahmedabad and has been in corporate world and a four-time entrepreneur. He presently practices professional management as a professional management consultant and also partners with two India's premier educational institute, namely IIT Mumbai and Indian School of Business Hyderabad, as a startup evaluator and a mentor. Over to you, Mr. Balwani.
Thank you, Vishnu, for those kind words. And a very good evening to all of you participants here today. As we conclude this evening's enriching session on winning with cross-cultural collaboration, it's my privilege to extend a sincere vote of thanks to everyone who made this exchange so impactful. First, our deepest appreciation goes out to our distinguished speakers, Dr. Pearl John, Michael Fernandez, Priska Sin, Ernie Goyette, and Randall Livingston. Thank you all for sharing your time and global expertise. Your insights on navigating cultural nuances and building trust across borders has provided us with truly actionable takeaways for the Indo-US corridor. I would also like to extend our sincere gratitude to our esteemed partners, MINDDOTS and the Culture Locus. Your commitment to bring this vital conversation to the IACC platform has been invaluable. And now I have a special announcement for our participants. To ensure that today's insights translate into sustained impact, the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce is pleased to announce a special post-webinar bonus. We are launching a complimentary 6-week WhatsApp learning community for all our registered participants. Now, participation in this community is entirely voluntary, but we highly encourage you to join. This limited duration forum will be managed independently by our experts at MINDDOTS and the Culture Locus to provide continued dialogue and peer-to-peer learning. While the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce will remain present as an observer, the space is yours to seek clarifications and deepen your cultural competence at your own pace. We look forward to seeing that transformation that happens here. Now, to our audience, thank you all for your active engagement and thoughtful questions. Your enthusiasm is what drives these forums, honestly. Finally, I have a special acknowledgement to the Indo-American Chamber's Secretariat team, specifically to my friend and colleague Vishnu Latish and Parva Shah for their seamless coordination and flawless execution behind the scenes. Vishnu and Parva, your dedication ensures the continued success of initiatives like these. So on behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, thank you all once again for your participation and continued support. We look forward to seeing you at our next engagement. Once again, this is Manoj Balwani signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Manoj.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you, everybody.